Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this event, Trafficking the Earth, Photography Communities and Extractivism. I'm Daniela Larraín, PhD student of Psychosocial Department, and along with Raquel Villar Perez, who is in this laptop because he couldn't come because of the strike. We are coordinating CLAB's early career researchers. CLABs stand for Center of Latin American and Ibero Visual Studies. Welcome. So we partner up with the London Mining Network, a UK-based charity working closely with mining-affected communities to organize a cycle of events around art, protest, and extractivism. We brought together artists, academics, and artist groups whose work reflect on the impact of extractivist practices in the Americas and the world at large. I also want to thank the Birbeck School of Art and the Birbeck Institute for Moving Image. Thank you, Stephen, for this, without whom this cycle of events wouldn't have been possible. So, Trafficking the Earth, Photography, Communities, and Extractivism is a roundtable focusing on the work photography has in revealing extractivist practices in Chile. Accompanying me, we have Armando Caroca Fernandez, who is a PhD researcher at the Global Development Institute, University of Manchester. He holds a Master in Urban Design Development at the Development Planning Unit, University College of London. He also holds a Master in Architecture at Universidad Católica de Chile. He's currently researching topics regarding political ecology of mining extractivism and the production of everyday space within the so-called sacrifice zones. He's also a member of the London Mining Network Chilean group. Traces of Nitrate is an art research collective devoted to documenting the extraction of minerals from Chile and their material transformations as they enter the capitalist system through financial markets of the City of London, UK. It is formed by the artists Ignacio Acosta, Xavier Ribas, and the art historian Louise Purbrick. They have been working together for more than 10 years now. Their first project, Traces of Nitrate, Mining History and Photography Between Britain and Chile, track archives and landscape in London, Liverpool, Swansea, and the Atacama Desert to explore the relationships between historical and contemporary forms of copper and nitrate mining. It produced a series of individual works, images and exhibitions, articles and books that are all compiled under a collective work titled Trafficking the Earth that you can peruse here today on that table. Is there. It exposes the historical constellation of loss and accumulation, depletion and displacement, violence and its disguise, began by the extraction and export of nitrate and copper. They recently were awarded a grant by the Art and Humanities Research Council to continue their investigation with the newest project, Solid Water, Frozen Times, Future Justice, Photography and Mining in the Andean Glaciers, or Frozen Futures in short. Frozen Future experiments with spatial and temporal collisions that can be created by photography to expose the global relationships, legacies and inequalities of capitalism, colonialism and extractivism. Whereas Trafficking the Earth focus on the extraction of nitrate and copper, they now also include the extraction of lithium. During this evening, give me one moment during this evening, Armando Caroca will start by telling us more about the London Mining Network, and then he will give an overview of the extractivist activity across the globe, and specifically, he will focus on what is happening in Chile. He will explain the potential reasons why it is happening on a larger scale in the South American country. Then we'll see the work of Traces of Nitrate. They will introduce us the Trafficking the Earth and their current investigation for frozen futures. And then we'll finally open the discussion. Thank you. So now, Armando, over to you. I'll
Thank you.
open the this one, isn't it?
Yes. Is it okay if I tell you when to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And as Daniela mentioned, my name is Armando Caroca. I am part of the Chilean working group of the London Mining Network, along with Xavier Martinez, who is also here. London Mining Network is, as its name mentions, it's a network of organizations working at different levels, including other NGOs, local grassroots movement, indigenous leaders, and social environmental activists in the Global South. We work in solidarity with them. That means that given that most of them are located in the Global South, in extractive intensive countries and territories, their voices are usually not heard. We intend to raise awareness and to advocate for those voices. The next one. By being based in the UK, we're able to put some pressure directly onto the heads and main shareholders of British mining companies who trade their stock in the London mineral stock, London metal stock, while producing the maximum visibility of the issues presented by affected communities, including economic and environmental degradation, lack of water for agriculture and human consumption, human rights violation, displacement, and everyday hazard to life and health of both human and non-human beings. This collective work allows us to connect people suffering from the same issues across geographies. For example, in the case of Latin America, different groups from different countries in the region have met through us and have started working together and to share knowledge, experiences, and also resistance strategies, particularly in legal issues. Next one, please. So this we aim at putting this pressure I mentioned over these British transnational mining companies working in the Global South, especially Anglo American, BHP, Glencore, Rio Tinto, and Antofagasta Minerals. One of the main strategies that implements London Mining Network is the capacity to attend the annual shareholder meetings or AGMs that usually happen here in London. Company representatives or heads are usually there, and they have to reply on, or they at least should reply to any question coming from any shareholder, regardless of the topic. So what we do is to collect questions and issues from the communities affected by these companies prior to the meeting, and if possible invite their local leaders to present the question themselves, or we can do that on their behalf. Next one, please. So London Mining Network is also has several groups doing different things. One of the most important part of it is the research aspect. In my case, I am from the Chilean group, but from Latin America we have people working from Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, just to mention the Latin American region. So these groups articulate the actions from in London with a series of groups and activists in the territories while doing research on specific topics such as vulnerability due to tailing dams, like that one, the consequences of global energy transition, the notion of just transition, and also specific legal cases and actions. Next one, please. As a result of that, London Mining Network has produced several reports, like the ones that I show here, talking specifically or mostly about the idea of energy transition and how it could be a just transition for the Global South, where most of the raw material for this transition come from. Also this report on martial mining, on the connection between the armed industry or the military industry and extractive activities, etc. And we also have more reports that you might find. We also have this leaflet that you might find outside, where you can find information on this report and some others that are on our webpage. Next one, we also have an education dimension, raising awareness of the impact of mining companies around the world, supporting seminars, lectures, workshops, and also film festivals. Next one, this.
We're up to time.
Okay, so these are some of the network members. You can see that we're a very large network of organizations. And then, so we don't have much time. We have some examples also from Latin America, some of the main cases we are working with, or the main communities we're working with in Brazil regarding the Mariana disaster, a collapse of a tailing dam by BHP Samarco mine. Next one. The Cerrejón mine, the largest coal mining in Latin America, working along the indigenous communities. This is also BHP, but this is like a joint venture, BHP, Anglo-American, Glencore operation. Next one, in Peru, the Antapacay mine, also working with indigenous communities of Espinar. Next one, and this is in Chile, El Soldado mine. I will talk a bit more about this later in my own presentation. This is from Anglo-American. There's a lot of issues in this case. And the last one, and this is also the Atacama Salt Lake in Chile, which is currently being, lithium is being extracted from the Salt Lake of Atacama, one of the driest areas in the world, affecting the Licanantay indigenous community. These are some of the examples of the work London Mining Network is doing in Latin America currently. Okay, that's the presentation of our work. You can always visit our webpage, as I mentioned, or send us an email there, contact at londonminingnetwork.org. We'll be happy to reply to those. Okay.
So it's this one, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so now I wanted to present very briefly some of the context of extractivism in Latin America. Just a few data to give some context to what Ignacio, Javier, and Luis are going to present later. Next one, please. So Latin America, the economic model of most of the countries in Latin America is based on extractive industries. Latin America has huge amounts of fossil fuel, gas, petrol, oil, and coal, along with some of the main deposits of copper, iron, silver, zinc of the world. By 2016, we had actually in Latin America the main source of oil and the second main source of, the main source of metals of the world and the second main source of oil of the world. Of course, extractive industry is much more than mining. It also includes fishery, forestry, and agriculture. You can see there how the continent is usually defined by their raw material contribution to the global north, mostly. Just a few examples. The total exports by country, the percentage of raw materials exported by country in 2019 was, for example, 82% of exports only in raw material. In Argentina, 85, almost 86% in Chile, 88% of raw materials exported by Peru, of the total exports of the country. So extractive industries have historically defined the region, but it got a critical increase during the commodities boom during the first decade of the 21st century, where the growth of China and India especially required an acute increase in the demand, or produced an acute increase in the demand of raw materials, especially metals such as copper and iron. This caused a large amount of socio-environmental conflicts. You can see there a summary to the right of the amount of mining, only environmental conflicts due to mining per country. And well, it's in Spanish, so you might not understand, but the most repeated issue that is mentioned in this conflict is the right to life. That's the main human right that is jeopardized by these mining operations. Next one. So, so based on these ideas of this community boom that happened in the early 21st century, it was coined the term neo-extractivism, which is basically this new boost to extractive activities, plus some kind of trend in several Latin American governments during the early 2000s to make these extractive operations more valued socially by distributing all the value generated by these mining operations. So that was called neo-extractivism. And Chile, in a way, was not really part of that due to the lack of a real leftist government during that period. Maristela Svampa is a very relevant researcher in Latin America about extractivism. She's from Argentina, and she coined the term commodity consensus, which is really relevant because it's basically the idea that Latin America has, after the commodity boom, and even today, the whole region has in a way accepted that Latin America is an exporter of nature, of raw nature, to the global north, and that in a way has defined our relationship to the Western countries. In her case, she even mentioned that this commodity consensus is even more relevant than neoliberalism as a paradigm for the region, despite it shares many common features. Next one.
Yes.
So, for example, now there's a new, we can say, a new risk for a yet new boost in extractive activities due to the so-called energy transition, which is being pushed by the global north, but it requires a lot of new. It could even require more mining than before because you need a lot of lithium, a lot of copper, and some other metals and materials to produce batteries and so on. So it could be like a new commodity boom, and that puts a lot of pressure again over territories rich in these resources. In Chile, we have a lot of copper, a lot of lithium, and all the eyes are put there. For example, Chile is observed as a main actor in this extractive activity. Next one. I think it's so. In my case, I've been researching in the recent years about the notion of sacrifice and sacrifice zones, which is a term that is increasingly being used in Latin America. It comes from the US, but it's currently used in Latin America. In Chile, in many cases, you can see some news there where the idea of sacrifice zone is being installed. And it's basically territories that are nearby industrial or extractive industries and are basically bearing all the negative impacts of this territory. So these areas are sacrificed for a greater good, supposedly, which is the uninterrupted mineral extraction and the production of profit, which is, in the case of Chile, a largely private profit. So it's not even for the government. So in the next one, you can see also in Chile the amount of cases not all of them are mentioned, are defined as sacrifice zones, but most of them are, and we have almost 130 socio-environmental conflicts only in Chile, and and the second biggest reason for this is mining. The first one is energy, and then we have mining. Next one. For me, again, as part of my own research, this is my, for me, it's the embodiment of this idea of sacrifice of the territory, of the people, and the environment, which are the main mining tailings. Mining tailings are basically all the leftovers produced after all the mineral extraction and refinement. So you have not only crushed rock, but you also have all kind of all kind of toxic substances like arsenic and all kind of acid substances, etc., etc. In Chile, we have more than 750 tailings. Most of them, that's Chile, and most of them are to the north of Chile, between Atacama and Coquimbo, but they are actually everywhere. And they are, of course, super toxic, and they never stop interacting with the environment. So they pollute the air, the soil, but also the aquifers. So they are part of an ecological system. They are never really completely isolated. And in the case of Chile, that's even more concerning because we are an earthquake-prone country, and we also have had in recent years unexpected heavy rainfalls due to climate change, especially in the north, which is a dry climate. So it's completely unheard of. This is one of the biggest. This is Tranque El Mauro in Coquimbo. Next one. So for me, at least, what I'm trying to research currently in my PhD and also trying to collaborate with London Mining Network is not only the tailing itself, but also the fact that these tailings are in many cases nearby inhabited areas, small towns, agricultural areas, or suburbs. You can see, for example, in the north of Chile, and Andacollo, and the mining in the center, and then the tailing there is almost the same size or even bigger than the town itself. Next one. These are just some examples. Caimanes, small town there, agricultural mostly, with the tailing dam here, much bigger, and they're always upriver. So if this thing collapses, it will flood the towns downriver. Next one. It's near to Santiago, the capital city. Huertos Familiares, a semi-urban area nearby a Las Tórtolas, which is another big tailing dam in Chile. Next one. And this is El Melón, which is the case I'm currently studying for my PhD. It's also a small town nearby El Soldado. El Torito is the name of the tailing, and it's part of El Soldado mine operation controlled by Anglo American. So this is also the case where the tailing dam is in a mountain range, in a creek, which in case of collapse will get very quickly, in matter of minutes actually, to El Melón and some other towns to the south. Next one. So far I have researched pretty much 2 cases in more detail. This is the case of Copiapó in the north of Chile. This is a bit different because this is a mining area, so this city that has grown due to mining, but at the same time they are surrounded. You can see there all the dots, the colored dots. Each of them is a tailing deposit. Most of them abandoned, really old. No one is in charge of them, and the issue is that they are completely invisibilized. I mean, they are part of the city. People don't even know in many cases that they live nearby these tailings. Next one. And you can only notice, and they actually noticed that they were living nearby these tailings when a flash flood in 2015 produced this landslide over the city, And then they took all these samples and they realized that all this mud contained the heavy metals from the very old tailing dams. Next one. This is again El Melón. You can see it's a very small town in a rural area. Most of the people work in agriculture. They don't even work for the mine. And you have this huge infrastructure here just above their heads. You can see it in the lower picture. You see some smoke there among the hills. So that's basically the tailing. And this thing is currently active, and it's a hazard for the whole town. Next one. I just went there last week. I took some images. You can see they already have some kind of emergency plan, which everyone says is not enough. There are issues with the water also. The mining company, Anglo American, is taking most of the water for their operation. And you see these small rivers are almost dry. They used to be full with water. But there are very interesting things there. Like, for example, this place, this vegetable store, which has the name Tailing on it. That's the name of the vegetable store. So I have to find out what does it mean if people don't feel in a way proud of it, of this, or they don't even know the risk of it, or it's just part of the culture. So there are a lot of things going on that are part cultural, part material, and also I think they have a very relevant visual dimension to it. The fact that the people more concerned are the people that is actually able to see the tailing dam behind the hills, etc., etc. So I just wanted to present these two cases. Next one, just to, well, this is also, they are active. Nevertheless, a small group of people is still active, and they are doing something to prevent this tailing to get larger and larger. So that's it. Those two cases, very briefly, just to introduce the context of sacrifice zones and extractive activities throughout the territory in Chile. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Armando. So my name is Xavier Ribas. I'm a Spanish photographer working at the University of Brighton, lecturing at the University of Brighton, where Louise was lecturing when we started the project. So the slides will go automatically, so I'm not going to stop in any images. But the project started with this album of photographs that I found in an archive in Spain, in a university library in Spain, in a university collection in Spain. And it's an album of photographs that documents nitrate extraction at the turn of the century, 1899, in Chile. And the album has a letter that directs the album to an address in London, in Bishopsgate. And the album is addressed to somebody called Lord Aldenham, who at the time was the director of the Bank of England, and also the owner or the director or the senior director of the merchant house based in London that owned this nitrate operation. So the nitrate operation was in Chile, in the Atacama Desert. And nitrate is like a salt, a white crystal, that at the time was commercialized as a natural fertilizer. So it was exported industrially and produced industrially from Chile and exported through the British ports of Liverpool and London, Bristol, through European markets. But it's also a component of the making of explosives. So it's a kind of wicked mineral that activates and accelerates forms of life in agriculture and forms of death in war. So for a period of 50 years, it was a crucial kind of commodity that went from these remote areas of the Atacama Desert and was financialized and traded through the merchant houses in London. So with this album, I thought that it would be interesting to document at the time when we started, it was more to document the object, the album as an object that has circulated through different geographies. So Louise and I and Ignacio started kind of questioning this album as an object, as a kind of an element that sits in a collection of fine art photography from the 19th century, but also as an industrial object. And so the question for us at the beginning was, how do you visually document an object that it's still in an archive, and yet it's connected to whole networks of processes of distribution, financialization, labor processes, capitalization, heritage kind of processes as well. So, and also the question also it was, how do you approach or document visually an object? And also, how do you visualize a mineral that doesn't exist anymore? You know, nitrate was excavated or extracted in the 19th century. It was disseminated in agricultural fields in Europe and exploded in the battlefields of the First World War, and it just disappeared out of sight. So how do you make an image of that? So through the process of thinking through these levels of invisibility and how to make a picture of it, we engage in kind of documenting nitrate as a mineral, but also the contemporary kind of extraction in the Atacama Desert, which is copper. So the whole, what we tried to do was to establish, if you imagine the album at the center of a constellation in which different elements in this constellation would bring an image of these minerals, whether it is in an object, whether it is in a site, whether it is in a document, whether it is in another object or an event. And so we created a number of exhibition works, exhibition pieces that you can see some here. We created a number of academic papers, presentations, conferences, participation in conferences, etc. So what you see here is different fragments of this constellation that we've been kind of producing. We've made some publications here that are here, and the very first presentation that we did when the work was still in process was actually here. It was from an invitation from Luciana Martins. We occupied the Fels Gallery, and we made a working process presentation, very, very simple, with photocopies and different materials that we had at that moment. And in 2017, having published 2 books, we had the opportunity to take the work to Chile, and we created an installation of a kind of portable exhibition, which was composed of 336 prints that contain images and texts that we've produced over these years. And we presented it in the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in the Universidad of Chile in Santiago. And this work is called Trafficking the Earth, is the text that, the work that kind of gives name to the presentation here. And the work basically contained 336 elements from the work that, the research that we've been doing. So some images were images that ended up in sort of exhibition pieces. Some images were part of the documentation process that we were doing with mobile phones or with small cameras or whatever, photocopies of objects. And the fragments of texts were mostly texts that came from the papers that Louise wrote in different stages of the project, but also extracts from bibliography that we were reading, documents that we found, and we extracted these elements. So all this was presented in a grid, in a large grid of these, I think it was like 7 lines by 43 columns, I can't remember now, that takes different forms according to the space where we present it. And it sits basically in a box. So it's an exhibition that we can take around in a suitcase with us. And then we published this small book here that I'll share it around, which is a photocopy publication that contains some of the elements of this large installation, and they just bound together with this rubber band. And sort of kind of fragments with different images and text from the installation. And so it's something that we've produced in photocopies to distribute freely in with people that we're working with, environmental activists or lawyers or schools in mining towns. So it's a kind of a free circulation of this material that we've been gathering around. All the research that we've done so far sits in a website called Traces of Nitrate, and you can download whole sort of texts. So we're producing documentation of archives that we've done. Basically, the kind of geographical scope is the relationship between Chile and Great Britain, because most of these mining operations that Armando was showing, they all kind of converge into a network of cities, of streets in the city of London. So the kind of geographical scope of our project is the relationship between Britain and Chile through mining operations. So these remote kind of sites of extraction and this very, very close proximity of financial institutions in London. Ignacio and Louise now will tell a little bit of where we are now with the project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the connections between Trafficking the Earth and our current project as a way of introducing it, and then and a little bit about the materials that we work with. So we looked at nitrate and at copper, which has been mainly Ignacio's work, and we're currently still looking at copper and lithium. So it's really interesting that, Armando, that you said, which is about raw earth being extracted from Chile, because if you work with photography, and the big important tradition in photography is landscape, it's a very different concept of nature to kind of think about it as raw earth, as energy or value that's moved, rather than is a landscape that is a given and given to the camera to be photographed. So what we're trying to do, which is important, I think, is to work with activists, but also work in quite an experimental way in relation to our art practice, and in that way maybe open up a critical space. So rather than just simply reproduce the images that the mining corporations use or those that are used in advertising, is actually to find a different way of seeing. And I think, for example, the strategies in Trafficking the Earth, which people can see maybe in the book, is to force juxtapositions between Britain and Chile, and force juxtapositions between the past and present. And so, for example, nitrate was really important. The mining of nitrate was well over before 1973 and the military coup, but it was present. It was absolutely, completely present. When the US invaded, it was around the nationalisation of resources that produced that military dictatorship that shaped and still shapes, in fact, probably still shaped the rejection of the constitutional vote, in a sense, is that kind of conservatism and fear. So I think that we tried with the photographs to use the power of photography to bring into the spaces of art galleries and spaces like this a debate where you can think again about a different way of seeing. And people have talked about that for a long time, and the power of photography to make you look again, to read again. Also the power of photography to puncture from the past into the present, which it always has the capacity to do. And so those were particular strategies in the putting together of Trafficking the Earth, and maybe we can talk more about that. But in my kind of bit of a moment, I'd say that one of the things that's taken us through Trafficking the Earth and into our next project, and we're very lucky to have funding from the state. We have Arts and Humanities Research Council funding, and to work again, is to take up kind of one of the key issues around invisibility, which is also something you said about the tailing dams are vast. They're vast, but people pretend they're not there because the reality of them is too difficult to accept within your everyday life. So people work with, as we all do, contradictions of capitalism, but they work with with incredible interventions into the landscape that people's lived experiences to deny that they're there. So actually that little image of the River Labes and saying it's here and it's quite interesting as a contradictory kind of moment in El Melon. So invisibility, both within the landscape but also actually in relation to how we could see with photography. So when Xavier takes the photograph, or when Ignacio's using film, or when I'm maybe taking photographs or maybe writing, it's about ways of thinking that you can see materials differently. And we're having to look at water because of the importance of the diversion of water by mining operations, both literally because they happen at the headwaters of glaciers, but also because of the use of water in the process as well. And then in lithium, when we're in the Atacama, so we've got a few sites on the Salar de Atacama, and our new project is one of them. I thought they were mining water because lithium's contained in the water. Actually, what was being mined is water itself, irreplaceable, ancient water from below the glaciers, older than we could possibly imagine, deep time, and it's just been dried out in some of the images that we've taken and we're working on now. So the question really for us in this project, that's the kind of artistic practice as well as the political practice, is that how can you make people see, you know? And so what is the role of photography in I think forcing or coercing, maybe a bit too strong, but in enabling or facilitating in another way to see capitalism at work, you know, capitalism at work against nature, against labour, and against political change actually as well in some ways. So we're kind of we're trying to work with invisibility, and what I think I've found is water's quite difficult to photograph, isn't it? It's quite difficult. It's not the easiest substance because it's a system. And so one of the things that Xavier is particularly interested in is that what is the glacier, like where does it reside, and does the glacier reside just high in the Andes, or does it reside in the water as it moves down through communities and into fields? And so how can we visualize not a object, which is photography's normal practice, but the systems and relationships? And so maybe those are invisible too, but it's kind of notions of invisibility that I think are particularly interesting. And photography's been interested in that for a long time, you know, pictures of snowflakes and so on. So we kind of got some historical work and some historical thinking to do as well as practice. Is there anything else I should say? Maybe I should just give you some space for your film.
So it's up to Louise, is really interesting.
No, I think so the new, like the few things I could say really about our new work is we've got 3 sites, so we work in a site-specific manner. So our 3 sites are Salar de Atacama. We're particularly interested in an Andean site. We didn't actually think we would be until we got there, Monterrey, which is a BHP mining site that was completely abandoned. So again, we may have to work with notions of ruin and notions of allegory to think about capitalism and how it works. And it's a ghost town of a space. And the Atacama is often read as a space of ghosts, so a space of the spectral, and nitrate mining left ghost towns. But also one of the things I would argue is photography is particularly good at showing that, but mining will always produce the past and the future very quickly, because if you dig out deep time and you spread across the earth, you produce a kind of a rupture in time, and then you produce a sense of the past where you kind of going forwards and backwards between past and present. So you have that very strong sense of ghostliness in those places as well. And the other sites actually I won't introduce because is the subject of your film. So it's tracing the movement of water from Huncao. So maybe it's time to show the film.
Yeah, I think we could just show the film and then we can talk about it, because I think it's quite self-explanatory.
And if people wanted to go back to any of the images in particular that we see as they go back, we can go back and hold on those images and talk about them. Each one of them is like a fragment. So each one of them could tell the entire history of nitrate, copper and lithium, as well as in juxtaposition. So we could talk all night probably about it. Thanks.
So this is 2
sorry.
screens. It's a multi-channel installation, so there are 2 screens that we're showing now, and one screen by
Something happened.
is a
Something happened. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want to dim the light?
I think so.
Maybe?
So the lights are just going on.
estamos al otro lado. Se puede ver el glaciar, la vega de nacimiento, la unión de ojos de agua, uno verde, uno negro, uno blanco. Se ve león blanco, león negro, alto de río blanco, Gustavo, gemelo. Al frente presente se le cae y ahí viene entrando la tormenta por Mardones. Y ahí tenemos a Canchita. Nos encontramos en el cajón del potrero alto y hay una pareja de guanaquitos. Bellísimo. Estamos ahí en el camino minero. Qué glacial. Bellísimo, bellísimo. Aquello de allá está llegando a la parte de Chorrillo. Acá abajo se ve un hoyo. Y acá abajo está esa parte, yo no la recuerdo. Parece que es nueva.
Esa humedad que ustedes pueden ver en una parte donde se tomaron evidentemente muestreos es humedad del glaciar que ellos rompieron. Como pueden ver, las huellas de la maquinaria están súper frescas. Estar en esta lucha constante es súper complicado porque acá en Chile somos nosotros, comunidades organizadas, quienes tenemos que defendernos de un Estado que es capitalista y que es depredador de una manera irrazonable.
Estoy haciendo aquí una grabación para poder mostrar lo que está sucediendo. Tenemos la minera acá, todos esos caminos que están acá se notan que son nuevos, y abajo hicieron un pequeño embalse.
Veo varias irregularidades dentro del tranque que ellos hicieron. Eso no es un embalse, hay diferencia entre embalses y tranques. Eso es un tranque. Si tú te fijas, está justo interviniendo un cauce natural de agua, porque está justo en la quebrada. Esto que hicieron es una carga ambiental. Así es que me voy a agarrar de eso para hacer acción jurídica, para que este conflicto se detenga de una vez. Vamos a tener que meter ruido y hay que hacer algunas acciones más concretas, paralelas a las jurídicas.
Thank you very much for sharing your work. Amazing. Let's open the discussion. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I just want to make a note. Actually, I'm producing a second version of this. It's like, anyways, it's on display now in a museum in Germany, and it's going to go to another place in Switzerland. But some few things will change, so it's not the final version. No one will notice.
experience.
So have you had time to look at the book here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you need some around?
Have you got a question? Is that a hand for a question?
Yeah, I mean, if nobody else is going to, I'll
Nobody else is going. You go.
just jump in. I mean, I want to ask you about silver nitrate.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you know, if you think about throughout the 80s and into the 90s, people used to talk about image pollution, meaning the kind of mass bombardment of images. But actually, people who work with photography have thought very little about actual pollution of photography, about the kind of, you know, the heavy metals that are involved in photographic production, from silver nitrate, gold, platinum, in mad cases in the 19th century, uranium, dyes, potassium, you know, other kinds of toxic substances. And so, you know, I mean, there is a kind of way in which the photographic industry is also a major factor in terms of these kinds of pollution. And just as a quick point, when I wrote my book on 19th century photography, I tried to do a calculation on how much silver nitrate was used in the 19th century British photographic industry. As far as one can tell, it's all coming from South America, probably from Peru. And you know, it's hundreds of hundreds of kilos per year of just silver that's being extracted, and no one has talked about that. Everyone is focused on the image, and so one of the things I've been thinking about is what would a history of photography be that wasn't interested in images, that you actually thought about all of this kind of extractivist capitalism that's involved in the production of photography. And of course, in the current period, where you know raw earths are actually kind of essential components of digital cameras and of camera phones and the rest of it, that this is, if anything, even more extensive. At one conference once, I was trying to emphasize the kind of material dimensions of photography, and somebody started waving their phone at me, trying to tell me that everything went through the ether. And I ended up asking, had the woman ever seen a cobalt mine? And the conditions in which cobalt is mined, to the extent to which, kind of charities have written reports on human rights abuses in those mines. So I mean, there's a kind of very, very direct parallel in what you're doing with photography itself, but it doesn't seem to be immediately being drawn out.
I think we're often asked about photography and its materiality, and I think it's really important. There's a few things in terms of sodium nitrate. Sodium nitrate was a component of the glue, collodion prints. So the glue, so it was actually part of that process. So the nitrate that we look at is part of a very specific moment. So that's one thing. The other thing I think about silver is the capitalist commodity par excellence. Is the money, the silver doubloons. It's the money. It's the it's the money. It's the form of exchange. So silver is particularly toxic in some ways, not least because of the mercury that was used in its extraction. So I think that we do try to talk about it. I think probably not enough. I think that's something we could think about some more. We should think more about that. I think one of the things I'm interested in is that what price visual culture really. So what's the price of our visual culture? And particularly through Ignacio's work on copper, which is without which we would, we couldn't be seeing that screen. All our plugs, I think that it's pretty much. It's one of those illusions of invisibility. Is we know it's exploitative, but we just carry on tapping away nevertheless. So that is one of the there's a really big difficulty for all of us. One of the things I think we probably should think more about the materiality of the image and the image's own exploitative and extractivist history, as well as just using those images. The materiality, I think, the other issue I think really around the new metals is, I think all of them were also dependent on carbon, so often those new metals are presented as an alternative to a carbon economy, on which they're utterly dependent, you know, in terms of not all of them, you know, there's some renewables in the recharging of battery processes are bikes and green cars and so on, but for the most part these still, that's why, you know, that's why we're, you know, it's why we're still worried about gas and so on, is because we need those for recharging. But it is something that we should probably think about.
Well, there is a current exhibition in Hamburg in the Museum of Kunst and Gewerbe Museum, and titled Mining Photography, that deals with the carbon footprint of photography. It's a large exhibition, and actually we kind of part of it because contributing with some work to this exhibition, and copy geographies is within that discussion. So somehow we take part in this discussion, although our work is not directly related to this. We're part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it might chime with your audience as well, for people who are looking at photographs, to actually think about what it is that these things are made of.
Yeah.
Because you know, there's a lot of discussion about materiality at the moment in relationship to photographs, but it's often about the nature of the paper or the print or whatever, and it's very rarely about the kind of fundamental, you know, exploitative, extractivist logic that's kind of involved in the production of these things.
Yes, I mean, it is true that it's something that we need to reflect more on this. I mean, the closest we've gone to that is the fact that photography is totally immersed in that expansive process, isn't it? Colonial process of reaching these remote geographies is totally immersed in photography. You know, landscape photography in the 19th century, it documents this process of expansion, isn't it? So photography goes with those extractions, extractive activities. But the actual materiality, it's true that at the beginning we did think about sodium nitrate as part of photography, but we kind of abandoned it in a way.
Well, because photography has contributed towards climate change, but also is the tool that enables to show us what is going on. So there's any contradiction in that relationship, which I find kind of really interesting.
We could think about it through kind of a lens of invisibility, because what you see is the content and what you don't see is the material form, and I think that might be a really good way of thinking about that. There was another question though as well, if that's okay. I don't know, could you see at the back?
Yeah, hi, I'm Nadine. My focus is on aluminium mining, a Jamaica, Britain, Canada connection. Ignacio, I'm interested in the geographies, the actual landscaping. So from the movie, the area that I live in is the northern part of that plate tectonic. So it's kind of very interesting to see coming out of a temperate rainforest, like the glacial patterning, which is now covered by more lush landscape, like grasses, etc., versus how it is in Chile, which is a dry environment. Because I started thinking, is that a younger geological space on a certain level, and then what that means around how easy it is to access the ore. That's a really big one. I guess my question, because I was focused on the triplets, I think of them, the Leons. You said the gemelos, the twins, but and so I'm just kind of interested in if you could speak a little bit more about that, what looks like a tailings pond that's coming up, that dam, because that thinness for me then becomes very important around tailings ponds. So that reservoir dam that they're trying to create there, is that the beginnings of a tailings pond? Do you know what that?
Yeah, of course.
There's no of course. I just
no. But I can explain. What she's saying, they are doing a mining exploration in this area, which is a privately owned park. So because in Chile we have the constitution from Pinochet that was written in Pinochet time, and then you can actually have this actually monolith that you see. This monolith, they mark the mining concession area, so you can buy area to explore the territory, and then you mark the territory with this monolith. So this is the mining concession areas. Pardon?
Was it the piedras, those white stones?
Yeah, you know this kind of monolithic structures, these pyramidal structures, and this is by law. You have to build them if you buy the rights to explore this land. So what these persons are doing, this is a U.S. offshore company called Nutrex, and they are actually exploring for so they bought the mines, the rights to explore the territory, and then in the nearby in the next land of Juncal, they are actually exploring for mineral resources. So very large exploration, which obviously can be counted as a form of already exploration is already a form of mining, isn't it? They are mining, and then what they build is they're redirecting the course of water, which is something that is illegal. So what she's telling there, Denise, which is the activist, she's saying all the things that the mine is doing, which are against the law. They broke the glacier, they're building a dam. Is not a reservoir because they redirects the course of water that fed the river, that goes to agricultural communities. So what they're exposing is kind of how the mine exploration company Nutrex is breaking the law, and that one of them is the building of this dam. The other person who's pointing at the video, they say this is a reservoir. She's saying this is not a reservoir, this is a dam because it's kind of they redirected the course of water, and then there's no environmental regulation. They're just breaking the glacier, which is also another environmental burden. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of the articulation of the narrative of the activist narratives and the voices that are saying this is what is happening in this area. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's for that.
So it's still kind of within the kind of legal framework, I would say, but then they do things that they shouldn't be doing, and then I suppose nobody is taking this any further.
Amanda, did you want to say something about the formation of those tailings dams?
Yeah, that
I
would
would
be
say- No, I was thinking that's different because they usually mining companies when they make a dam they kind of use existing nature to do it. So they usually choose creeks or areas surrounded by hills, so it's already an enclosed area. And usually the tailing is not exactly in the same place where the mine is. Sometimes it can be further away, very, very far away, and they just send all this waste from the mining extraction site to a disposal site. It could be further away by tubes, because this material is so they can add water so that facilitates the process of transporting it, or it can be done by trucks. But in that case it didn't look like that. It looked like maybe they are just saving some water from.
Yeah, they're saving some water, but they
further
shouldn't be doing
operations.
this because it's in the creek of the mountain.
Yeah.
So that is an environmental burden. That's what she's saying.
I mean, if they own the creek, I don't know how it works exactly. They still don't own the creek. They only have the right to exploration.
Yeah, because they are exactly.
What I thought was interesting about your question is that if you're reading landscapes, like trying to look at the landscape, one of the things I think that the tailings ponds, first of all, when you see them, you think they're a lake. You just think, why is that lake white? Why is that lake so white? But what they are is these extraordinary movements of the earth from one place to another place. So this has been inside the earth, and then it's on the top of the earth, and is very unstable, crumbly. It looks solid, but actually it's quite crumbly matter. So I think some of them is that they're sort of, in some ways they're naturalised, as Amanda was saying, they're naturalised into a landscape space, but they are disguises in a way, violence in the disguise. And so I think it's quite interesting about how you can learn to read a landscape of violence and see violence where in fact you're kind of seeing a sort of modelling of that process that makes it look more invisible. And I think.
Thank you for that point. Sorry to interrupt, but that's exactly how it is where I'm from.
Yeah.
I grew up in the shadow of a mine, and we call that thing a lake. It was totally naturalized, but in our dialect there is no such thing as a lake. The word itself is a foreign concept, which is how you begin to unpack this thing that you grew up next to is actually not natural. And ojos de agua, I was thinking about that as well, just watching it. In Guyana, there's a blue lake that is a tailings pond, and it's this brilliant blue that seems
Yeah.
actually a tailings pond that children
Yeah.
swim in, that's been naturalized. So thank you for that point.
No, no,
it
that's,
seeps in
Mm.
and then seems normal, and when it's actually not.
Yeah.
I just remember a case, a documentary in the north of Chile, the city of Copiapó, and how people there living there forever, like being born in Copiapó, they said, you see all these hills in the background, like when I was born here, when I was a child, they were not here, but now it's like a completely different nature. But it's so integrated into the original nature that only people living there like for 20, 30 or 40 years can tell. And that's I mean, in the case I showed, it's very clear the difference. But maybe in your case that you said that it's more covered with vegetation, or it's more difficult. But also in the north, if you leave these things there for enough time, it will just merge with nature. But they still, I mean, actually, the oldest, the tailing, the most dangerous it is.
Absolutely. We live with that. Thank you
Yeah.
for that point.
I think one of the things that for us is, I mean, we could just talk about here, is from the perspective of photography, is how, I mean, what I was saying before is how do you document an object or a landscape? And as Armando was saying, the tailing dams are 200 kilometers away from the mine, and the tailing dams are filled with water that comes some 200 kilometers away from the mine in another direction. And then the financial system comes from, 15,000 kilometers away, and the labor force come from other geographies. So in order to photograph a mine, it's no use to make a photograph. In order to photograph a mine, you cannot just go there and take a picture of the mine. You need to do something else. And so this something else is this kind of, you could call it constellation, you could call it a grid, a kind of a composition of fragments that visualizes moments and times and spaces in which an image of the mine or the mineral or the capital or the labor force can be generated. The mine in itself, it doesn't fit in a single image.
Yeah.
And therefore the strategy that we follow is that to make large compositions of images and texts, kind of joining temporalities and geographies that are not connected, that are not in the same place, that are connected through these networks.
Yeah. One of the issues regarding that, one of the biggest issues to study tailings is, like, in many cases, as I mentioned, they are not there, you don't recognize them, and the effect they have over the population, over the environment is really slow. It can take decades, it can take generations even. So you can see higher rates of cancer, for example, after a few decades, or higher rates of respiratory diseases. And it's very difficult also to connect the cause with the effect, or vice versa. It's not like in other examples, like sacrifice zones due to industries where you can see the smoke, or you can see very clearly, or you can smell it. Sometimes you don't see anything, you don't smell anything, but it's there, and you have to trace it. And in my own research in El Melón, that's going to be one issue, like how do I document visually this through maps, but also probably through photographs. You can see maybe, I've been thinking about asking people to take pictures of their own homes, maybe they are covered in dust or something like that, or you see a little cloud of dust in the horizon. It's very subtle. Until you are in front of the tailing, until you move to the next hill and you see the whole thing, and it like hits you in the face. But if you're just a bit below it or downriver, you don't see it. It's like a myth. Many people I interviewed or I talked to in El Melón, they talk about the tailing dam as a myth or as a story. It's not necessarily an object.
There's another question there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's fascinating to hear you all speak and to watch the film. I was wondering or thinking about the question of touch. I mean, watching the film, there's this sense of the gaze that's very gently, touching its fingers across the landscape and the animals and so on, in comparison with the kind of aggressive touching, seizing, grasping of the mind, which is exploding and so on. And I felt like it was sort of educating my sense of touch in some way as a subject of our social arrangements. That there was something about this question of touch and whether you'd thought about this, the embodiment of this experience of digesting the art.
Those spaces, especially around the tailings dam and around lithium, are really dirty. Like they're really scratchy, irritating to human skin. And I've been interested in that in terms of nitrate, its confrontational nature when things are out of place around there. But so, for example, when we washed our clothes or hands after leaving those spaces, it was like dirt like no other. It was quite extraordinary. So I think some of it, I think it's really good that it does give you a sense of haptic sense, the film, and maybe even some of the photographs, but I think there's something quite different. I don't know if you wanted to, about being in some of those spaces where people live with a level of dust, but which is also not just, it's also to do with the movement of things that are out of place. It's one of the definitions of dirt, isn't it, is that it's out of place. So water moves in really odd ways as well. So there's a movement of huge trucks and rumbling, moving industrial water, agua industrial, agua natural, agricultural water in trucks. So water moves in these really strange ways. Water moves in these massive rubber pipes as well. But everything seems to be covered in the waste matter of mining in a way, which I think is really, which I think we will have to think about how we convey. But it's good that you had some sense of
Louise
tangibility.
wrote about the photographs in the album, in the 19th century photography album. If you pay attention to the labor force that it appears in different parts of the pictures are taken to document the investment in a way, the factory, the machinery, the movement. But among the pictures and the objects and the structures appear the human figure. And you, Louise, maybe you want to talk about how the cloths that they wear,
I mean
different labels,
so
wear
19th century miners, every single handle had its own fabric wrapper. So there's fabric wrappers around people's boots, around their waists, around all those metals, because it was this substance so irritant. And then when it's moved here and it was in munitions factories, if you were going to work with TNT, even like an earring would have to, any spark of dirt would ignite it. So one of the things I think that it's scratchy and irritating is because it is dynamic. It's a dynamic substance. Lithium as well. Lithium produces energy, so they have this quite confrontational effect on the human body. And people get accustomed to that as part of their everyday living, is to be in these environments that are irritating, irritants in that sense, but also produce people at odds with their environment as well. The environment is quite confrontational. Yeah.
I just want to say something in relation to the animals, for example. I think the thing that you talk about touch is also about feelings to me sometimes. It's about connecting emotionally the viewer with the narrative, and then asking the viewer or suggesting the viewer to take a position in the fight, or in the fight basically. Are you with the mine, or are you with the conservation? So in this case, it's all very much about the conflict between conservation and extractivism. We have one part that is trying to preserve and using technology as camera traps to record the animal, all the animals, and then the wildlife. And then in another way, I think as artists we ask ourselves, how do we use technology to actually expose the mining activity? In this case, for example, I asked the environmentalists to set up camera traps to watch the mining activities, to survey the mining. So it's kind of, in a way, and the camera traps gives you really like an amazing insight into wildlife, because it's no there's nobody, there's no human presence there, so the animals can act as they act all the time. So that's the beauty of it. And then also, and then obviously you can build the sequences, because I research, it's a huge archive, and then you have to kind of build the sequences and then redirect it. So I think the touch, in a way, of art is kind of also about feelings, and then that's what the piano and the composition, because I want to connect the viewer with the narrative, and then one way is through touch or through feelings, and through, I don't know, that also adds up to this other kind of historical context with because the territory of the desert is quite far from, this is much south, it's quite different, it's not so much dust, but it's just a different narrative, I don't know if that helps.
I think it was important for you to show the nature, because a lot of people that are not familiar with the mines normally think it's a very kind of dead place, I guess.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were showing all of that was such a nice contrast to see, like, maybe a scene of rocks, which is kind of nothing alive, but then seeing all this other nature around it is quite, like, shocking, and it's pretty unsettling to think that all these animals live next to all this toxicity. It's really good.
And it's an interesting point about proximity, because there's geological time, but also a mine, if a mine is underground, like as they are, and it might be, as the road travels up and down these valleys, it might be a 2-hour drive, but actually across the deep in the geology, the geographical distance is sometimes like 10 kilometres. So it's really interesting. So there's another way of thinking about it. It's not how long does it take you to get from the tailings pond to the mine, because by road it's going to be a really long way, but kind of underground, as the crow couldn't fly in a way, it's going to be really, really near. Yeah. So quite shocking, I think. Quite shocking.
I really like the video because it shows you don't have many opportunities to see the whole process, right? Since seeing the glacier and the water going down, and how is exactly this kind of landscape where mining occurs. It's usually something that you don't have access to it. You just see the results. So it's really it's very clear the impact it has. So you in the video you have all the process, which all seems very natural and very like organic, of course, till you see the first track and you immediately notice that and can tell that there's something wrong going on. So it's a change, very abrupt, very clear. I think it's any medium that we can have to show that I don't know, that sense of scale, that sense of proximity, that sense of like like to make it close to the senses in general. I think that helps a lot to understand what is going on. I would love to see even more of the process, like what's going on later, till even to see the mining extraction, and then what happens with the metal and the devices you do, and how is the industry later using that metal, etc., etc. Like seeing the whole process in a movie, like that would be amazing. You never get to see and to really understand how this is done. You only see the final product, or the mining, maybe the pit, but nothing in between. But it's great.
I know that you have visited Chile many times. Probably you have built a strong relationship with communities, because behind your work there are communities in resistance, and in relation to our work as Element, I would like to know, because when I don't know if it was Denise who was speaking, she mentioned like I need to do something, I need to sue to the state, and it's interesting for us that if people on the ground if they are aware about the link between these transnational Britain mining companies, or just from your perception, they refer only about the weakness of the state, because Chile is just one case, but this is happening everywhere in different countries. And yeah, the British companies has a big responsibility of the crisis we are living and we are facing, and the people on the ground sometimes, for our perception, it's not that easy to understand who or which are our enemies. So yeah, I
Well,
don't
what
know.
she's saying, I think, is very important, because she's saying our enemy finally is the state, because the state is ultra capitalist and is predatory, because that's the state that is allowing all of these companies to. In the interview we did, you remember, she did talk very clearly about Anglo-American. They are very aware. I think.
I think it's a very big problem. It's not necessarily a problem of photography, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a problem about internationalism in some ways, and I think that neoliberalism and its formation, in some ways, it's actually, we see it as a kind of, we see it in all kinds of different ways in terms of how capitalism operates as debt or as nothing. But one of the victims along the way has been international solidarity. In that, and I think that London Mining Network is a really good example about how to keep on rebuilding it, and it's something that has to be never taken for granted. It has to be formed and shaped through relationships. So I think one of the good things about site-specific photographic practice is you really have to get to know people who are there, and they have to trust you and want to work with you. And so it means that if somebody talks to you, they maybe can feel the echoes of their story somewhere else, you know. And I think that it can be quite lonely for activists, particularly because they are threatened. You know, they're not necessarily threatened by somebody who knocks at their door as a police officer, but people are threatened.
Well, Denise received death threats before, and then some of these conversations and WhatsApp conversations when she was explained, she's been threatened by death. But like this communication that came out after this.
But it is for our practice. It's about the question is about how we can enable those voices to circulate more widely, but also to respect those relationships, and the way in which they articulate communities' relationship to the land for us is really, really important. And I think some of the people's understanding of land is quite different from a Western perspective, and quite different particularly from those of Anglo-American. And so there's a sense of, I mean, those companies are still absolutely, completely believe in notions of progress. You know, like that. You know, we're on a dying planet, and they still adhere to an idea that it's, you know, a deeper mine, the more stuff, the better, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And they are really, really powerful. So I think that is one of those things, is like trying to articulate not just their voices, but that other kind of view about what it means to live in on with the land. Yeah. We've got some questions.
I just wanted to say something that in my visit to El Melon, of course it was a short visit. I only talked to environmentalists and community leaders, and they know how Anglo-American works, etc. But based on what they told me, these kind of territories, like these sacrifice zones, this mining area, are usually territories where the state is very absent. So there's a lack of state there, a lack of services, a lack of funding. So the mining comes as the state, and the relationship that the community establishes with the mining company is really complex. As in with the state, they give like good things and bad things for the people. They cannot, I mean, everyone is in it, and at the same time it also makes all these kind of different groups within the community regarding what kind of relationship you make with the mining, with the company. Everyone has a different interest, everyone has a different opinion, perspective, etc., etc. So it's this company who has a very simple and clear objective, which is to extract mineral, they operate in a way that becomes really complex and really difficult to trace in the way they operate and also in the way people understand the company. They don't see necessarily as the enemy. They all, and sometimes they see it as a good actor, as a benefactor. And in El Melón, people don't even work in the mine, so miners come from elsewhere.
Yeah, but they pay the football pitch and they.
Yeah, and usually the mining company acts in a way that they remove things from the community and then they give back as a present or as a. They remove the water and then they give back the same water and people is like thankful for that. It's really complex.
Yeah, the smelter that is part of the network of the mine I grew up under, the workers are striking, you can't hear about it, and it's about pensions, right? A mining town was built by the mine that was the first development. It's like a frontier, basically. So you can't walk in there and be like, whatever about the mine. There's generations of people that have a relationship with it. Literally, it built the town. My question is around grids, actually. And there was a small photo of like an overlay of a grid. From my particular country, I try to pay attention to the licensing. So there are these old ways in which the state has cut up the island. Do you know what I mean? For exploration or whatever. And these licenses are almost like holding companies are numbered. You know, you never kind of know who owns the license now. You just kind of know how it's mapped out. But then we've seen, you know, the British come, the English come, Russia come, China come. Do you know what I mean? Like, literally it becomes this international spot. So I'm kind of interested in if anybody is thinking kind of around those kinds of plots, because I find they stay the same. Do you know what I mean? They're marked out like in the 50s, 40s for us from the declassified stuff I'm looking at, because it was around the war. So it became, because it's aluminium was important to war, it became this thing that was classified. Do you know what I mean? It was controlled that way. So I'm interested in whether or not anyone is paying attention to those particular old grid maps of licenses that we don't always know who owns them, but we can kind of see maybe where exploration is going to happen or not based on that. Just a question.
I mean, I think you might want to say something about monoliths. So the monoliths that Ignacio was showing are kind of forms of a license. They're the visual form of a license or a right to mine. And so one of the issues I think around all mining operations is that you can rights to mine are bought and sold separate from the land, but they are the land's commodity form. And so and often, for example, Chile was shaped by the licenses for nitrate. So there was a war, and for sale in that war were the land rights to mine for nitrate, and the border shifted exactly where the richest nitrate fields were. So there's that. It's a kind of the license or the right or the permission or the concession. There's a concession sometimes they use, or license or permit. And the company that Nutrex are the buyers and sellers in the rights to mine. That's what they do. So they'll buy them up and then they'll sell them on when they know their relatively value to the big mining companies who don't necessarily, you know. So it's a form of trading in land, not land itself, but in the right to use that land for material value and for financial value.
Yeah,
so I think it's really important work. Yeah. And I not around mining, but I listened to an amazing paper by a Californian lawyer who would argue even that capitalism itself is based on those forms of licensing, parceling land and then creating debt upon that land. So the ways of both encroaching upon land itself, so taking over in terms of occupation and expansion, but also capitalising it is to parcel it and then raise a debt, so form a license or a right, and then sell those on. So it is a really interesting question how that happens. I'm quite interested in the way in which those licenses also look like mapping technologies of trigonometry, you know, just the way in which the land is mapped out and parcelled out.
Mhm.
I think it's really...
Yeah, and on the idea of the separation of
Yeah.
rights between the land rights and the underground rights and the right to access to water, and then and that how that transfers from person to person. There's one person in this project, is Thomas Tinge, which is who works at the park, and he's a investigative journalist, and he has a whole lot of documentation on the mining concessions and who owned them before, because the person who was working there with the cows, he was actually the person who had the cows before, pastoral communities. He was buying the rights to explore, and then he sold these rights to Nutrex. So it's kind of because he saw some mineralizations, and he thought, oh, there should be some minerals here, and then he told this company, who is a Chilean exploration company, and then they sold those rights to Nutrex in the US, and now it's kind of a mess.
Sorry, that seems so similar.
Yeah,
1938 with grasslands that couldn't grow grass for cows.
Exactly,
Dude was like,
right.
I should get a chemist to come look at this soil.
Exactly, right.
And the next minute, you know, do you know what I mean? Like it just, and he probably did the best deal. But it literally began with cows. And grass that wouldn't grow.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems really like nothing, but it's actually a key part of that story. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for your
Somebody
intervention.
else had a question, I think, was it?
Yeah, sorry, I have a question about the lifespan of the tailing dams. So you said there was 750 in Chile.
Yes.
And I'm curious about what's possible in terms of reparation or repair. Are there projects of repair, or any of the mining companies held accountable? Are there any cases where it worked?
Actually, there are some examples of bioremediation in Chile, in the south of Chile, where they have covered some abandoned tailings with some vegetation or some kind of specific plant that resists to live in that kind of soil, very acid and with a lot of heavy metals. So there are some examples on that. But there are also questions about what happens to that, because you are, in a way, these plants will be later be eaten by other animals. So you're, in a way, just translating the problem, transferring the problem from one level of the trophic scale to some other being. So from plants to a bird, and then to a mammal, and so on, and maybe at the end to the human being. So there's no clear answer globally how to remediate these things. They're usually a liability pretty much forever. You're never completely sure that you have completely isolated this matter. It's always interacting with the environment in all sorts of ways. And actually the oldest tailing is the most dangerous, because it becomes more acid, and it releases acid to the aquifers, etc., etc. So it's really active. It's never a dead thing. It's alive. To a large extent, it's alive. And if you try to move it to somewhere else, that also releases a lot of dust and substances to the air. So it's really difficult what to do with it. Now in Chile, there's a lot of policies about reprocessing the tailings, because the old ones usually still contain a lot of valuable minerals that current technologies would allow to extract. So in Chile, that's one of the solutions they give, like reprocessing. So you at the same time you move the thing from the inhabited areas, and you extract some value from it. But I suspect the main reason for it is just to extract more value from it.
And it's interesting, because in Potosi, it's like they were so wealthy at one time. I'm sure people know there was silver on the roofs, and when they ran out in the mines, they started to take their towels down. So there's a history of going back over waste to look for more minerals and metals. But what's interesting is the question really for a chemist remediation and I think we spoke to a chemist and her phrase for it was not within the human scale. She didn't mean in a human lifetime, she meant not within the scale of humans on the planet could we resolve the problem.
It's just too big, isn't it?
And there's a really interesting project not far away from here at Brunel University called Citizen Science that's using plants to do exactly that in some of the industrial heartlands of the Northwest. And so they're kind of trying to turn them into allotments and that's part of, and they're trying to harvest lead from plants. So to instead of put plants back into the system is to actually use them to harvest minute amounts of lead. But again, that's like, it's not going to, it's a very slow process.
Mm-hmm.
And so this sort of slow violence has an equally slow process of remediation. So I think remediation it's fragmentary and incomplete and so long term. You know, we have to think of these things as not repairable, as actually a loss that cannot be brought back. And I think that's quite important to think about that as loss and as surplus and as waste of the capitalist system that cannot be just made better. Like we're back on the route of progress again. We can make it better by better science, because I don't think that's not possible.
It's interesting because for capitalism, they get really nervous and anxious about not being able to extract value from things. So even later when they produce waste, they're still thinking how to do something with waste. You can see that in electronic waste now, or some other kind of recyclable thing, or circular economy. So there's always someone thinking how to extract value, even from things that are valueless by definition. And I remember an archaeologist from Chile studying tailings, and she said that for mining companies, tailing deposits and dams are not the past, are not ruins, but are actually the future. I mean, they are like future reservoirs of future value. Waiting for the technology to be available to reprocess it. So it's
You
like
still have leftovers, no? After that, so I don't see how the future is there when you will still produce more rubbish. I mean, they will have to use more chemicals in order to treat that, and then there will be double chemical. I don't know. I don't think it's very positive. I think it's a lot.
Sorry, we are on time, so I think that will be the last question.
Okay.
Thank you. No, I don't. Nadine, yours is. I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding. Please, no.
Because I'm watching plans for new mines in my country where we have rare earth minerals. I just did a talk on this the other day at a seminar. And what's interesting is with the plan, I'm looking for where the tailings pond is going to be, and I'm not seeing it. But what I am seeing is that the company that they're doing the deal with just got $2 million in the States for setting up a processing factory. You know what I'm saying? So I see them maybe moving the new tailings right in to take care of that rare earth mineral stuff, because we already know that it exists within our ore. We've just never been able to exploit it. So literally watching, I'm pretty sure the waste is just going to be shipped, because they've gotten serious funding from the States to explore that, which you don't see in any other reports. And you have to kind of watch what they're doing. So I love this project. Thank you so much for doing it, because it makes me not seem so crazy.
But one of the things you're talking about is really interesting. Is about what are the processes through which we can visualize the future, and that's part of our, which we haven't really spoken about so much. As part of the new project is to try and think, how can we imagine a future, and how can some of the tools and technologies, drone or photography or mapping or discussion generated by some of those technologies can allow us a possibility of thinking of another future that's not extractivist, not necessarily capitalist. And I think that's a really hard task, because we're kind of ground down by the power of capital, of extractivism, of neoliberalism. So the spaces within which it's possible to imagine, and what you're doing is like, where are they going next? That's on the route to imagining, stopping them in a way, like where will they be? Which is tough, isn't it? It's a tough call, really. So yeah, cool.
So thank you very
No,
much,
thank you.
Louise, Ignacio, Thank you very much all for coming.
Like, it's for us, it's really important that we we talk with
Yeah,
activists,
absolutely.
because it's something that people talk about talking with activists, and they write bids and get money because they're going to talk with activists. So it's actually important just to do it. So thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks to Raquel, maybe. She's not here anymore.
Thank you all for coming today.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know where it is?
That all our events are free, and as Element we work with communities in resistance against extractivism. So if you want to donate, you can go to our website, and also we left some comics outside about a case in Colombia. You can take for free if you want. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.